Chapter 1. Check-in. The Brackenmoor Hotel was the kind of place that never should have survived the era of chains and franchises. Tucked off a half-forgotten interstate exit in rural Pennsylvania, it stood 3 stories high, a squat relic of the 1000. 920S, wrapped in chipping green paint and enshrouded in creeping fog. Rain lashed the cracked windows as Eli Sutton pulled into the gravel lot, his tired Corolla coughing a final protest before he killed the engine. He was soaked before he reached the entrance. Inside, the air was stale with the scent of mildew and old carpet, the kind of smell that clung to your clothes like a memory you couldn't shake. The lobby was dimly lit by a single chandelier, several of its bulbs long since dead. A faded oriental rug sprawled across the floor, curling at the edges. The wallpaper, yellowed and bubbling, peeled like skin after a sunburn. No sound but the tick-tick-tick of a grandfather clock in the corner. The woman at the front desk appeared as suddenly as the storm, materializing from the back room with a forced smile and hollow eyes. Her name tag read Marla. "You're a little early," she said, voice flat but polite. Eli wiped water from his face and gave a weak smile. Better than driving another hour through this crap. Marla didn't respond, only slid a leather-bound ledger across the desk with long, bony fingers. Her nails were stained a dull yellow. Eli signed his name and handed back the pen. She turned, reached beneath the counter, and brought out a tarnished brass key. Room 209. Her hand lingered as she passed it to him. For a moment her eyes twitched toward the hallway behind him, then back. "Second floor," she said quietly. "Elevator's out." As Eli turned, she added, barely audible, "If anything feels off, just get some rest. The walls play tricks in the rain." He blinked, but when he looked back, she was already gone. The stairwell smelled of damp concrete and rust. Each step creaked under his weight. The second-floor hallway stretched long and narrow, cloaked in shadows. Sconces flickered on the walls, casting warped reflections on the floor. He passed room 25, 207, then paused. There were drag marks in the carpet, 2 long, dark gouges in the threadbare runner, as if something heavy had been pulled toward the far end of the hall, faint but unmistakable. They trailed off just before he reached room 209. The door stood slightly ajar. Eli hesitated. Something about the room looked strained. The frame tilted a degree too far left. The number plaque, 209, hung askew, one brass screw barely clinging. The key turned with a mechanical groan, and the door opened with a reluctant sigh. Inside, the room was like the rest of the hotel, aged, dreary, and drowning in neglect. A single queen bed sagged in the center, the sheets thin and wrinkled, smelling faintly of bleach and something coppery underneath. The wallpaper curled around a ceiling leak. The radiator in the corner hissed quietly, as if whispering warnings in a foreign tongue. Eli dropped his bag and sat on the edge of the bed. His body ached from the long drive, and the storm outside was only intensifying. Thunder cracked like a gunshot overhead. He leaned back, shoes still on, and stared at the ceiling. And then he heard it, little wet dragging sound. Not from inside the room, but just beyond the door. Slow, methodical, like flesh sliding over tile. He stood, heart thudding, and moved to the peephole. He opened the door, quickly, expecting maybe a maid or another guest. But the hallway was empty, silent. The air smelled sharp, metallic. He stepped out, looked both directions. And still nothing. But now, behind him, a creak. Eli spun. The bed had shifted. Just slightly. The corner post now rested 2 inches outside the rug's edge. He hadn't noticed it before. Or had he? Frowning, he stepped back inside, closed the door, and locked it. The night passed in restless fragments. At 3:12 a.m., he awoke to the sound of deep breathing, not his own. It echoed low and long, like someone just outside the walls, inhaling with desperate need. He held his breath, trying to locate the source. Silence. When morning finally clawed its way through the clouds, Eli sat up and rubbed his eyes, then froze. The number plaque on the door, when had it changed? Now read Room 211. Clean, straight, new screws. He opened the door slowly. The hallway looked different. The picture hanging opposite his room was now 6 feet to the right. The faded fire extinguisher box had vanished. Even the air smelled subtly altered, like the breath of something vast and unseen had passed through in the night. Down the corridor, a member of the cleaning staff pushed a supply cart. An older man, hunched with a gray mop tucked into one hand. Eli stepped into the hallway, confused and anxious. "Hey," he called out. "Wasn't this room 209 yesterday?" The cleaner didn't look up, just mumbled something, turned a corner, and disappeared behind a slowly closing door. The silence after was enormous. Eli looked back at his room. The door stood open like a mouth, waiting. Behind it, the bed still sagged in the middle, and the radiator still hissed softly, softly, like it was laughing. He closed the door without stepping back inside. For the first time, he noticed that the drag marks in the carpet were a few feet farther down the hall than the night before. Fainter now, like something was covering its tracks. Room 209, wherever it was now, was on the move. Chapter 2. Denial and Decay. The sun never really rose at Brackenmoor, just pushed back the darkness long enough for the filth to be seen in full color. The walls looked yellower by day, like nicotine-stained teeth. The ceiling had grown another spot overnight, brown and swollen like a bruise about to burst. Eli stood in the hallway, blinking at the plaque on his door, 211. He walked 3 paces down, checked the room next to his, 213. Backtracked. The number hadn't changed. But something was wrong. He knew it. He remembered every door from the night before, every step he'd taken, every crack in the wall. The bed had been under the framed painting of the dogwood trees, not across from it. The window view had shown a dead tree wrapped in power lines, not a sagging fence and overturned dumpster. It was the same room. But it wasn't. Downstairs, the lobby was empty. No Marla. No one. A faint smell of vinegar and wet cloth hung in the air. Eli leaned over the front desk, peering into the darkened back room. No sign of life. A radio played faintly from somewhere inside, static-filled gospel bleeding through the speaker. He rang the bell on the counter. Once. Twice. Nothing. A cleaning cart creaked past behind him. He turned. An old woman in a maid's uniform was pushing it, her mouth a tight line, her eyes fixed straight ahead. "Excuse me," Eli said. "Hey, do you know what's going on with room 209? The woman didn't slow down, didn't acknowledge him, just kept pushing the cart, its wheels squealing slightly on the warped wood floor. Then, still nothing. Eli stepped in front of the cart. That stopped her. Her eyes met his for a fraction of a second, glassy, watery, and rimmed red, as if she'd been crying for years. Her lips parted, and what came out wasn't a voice. It was a dry, phlegmy whisper. "You shouldn't follow it." Then she turned the cart sharply and wheeled it around him. One of the garbage bags on the cart twitched. Eli backed away. He returned to his room, 211, 209, whatever the hell it was, and pulled out his phone. No signal. Wi-Fi showed a single network, room not found. He tried to call out anyway, The screen froze, rebooted. Nothing. He grabbed his coat and keys and headed out. This was done. He didn't care if he had to sleep in the car. Screw the refund. But when he reached the front doors, they refused to open. They didn't stick. They simply wouldn't open. He pushed harder, ramming his shoulder into them. Nothing. Not even a creak. He glanced out the glass beyond it. The storm had calmed. Sunshine even shimmered off the wet pavement. His car sat 20 feet away, untouched. Eli banged on the glass. "Hey, someone open the goddamn door." No one came. He tried the side door in the hall, sealed, fire exit, barred. He returned to the front, breathing hard, knuckles whitening as he pounded. Behind him, something creaked. He turned. The elevator door, out of order, rusted, closed when he checked earlier, was now open. Darkness yawned within. No light. No hum of electricity. Just the stink of mold and something deeper, like blood gone sour. And behind that, a scraping, a wet, leathery drag echoing up the shaft. Eli backed away, not realizing he was shaking until his knees knocked together. Then, quietly, the doors began to close on their own. He stood frozen until they clicked shut. Back in his room, he paced like a caged animal. The room was smaller, he was sure of it now. The window was closer to the bed. The radiator was closer to the door. The light from the ceiling fixture hung lower. He tried to pull the chain on the bulb, snapped it clean off. "Okay," he muttered. "Okay, just think." He opened the closet. A dead rat lay inside. Or something that had been a rat. Its body was bloated, purple-black, fur matted and curling like burnt paper. Its jaw hung open, revealing tiny human-like teeth. Maggots swarmed from its eye socket in a blind, rippling mass. A foul, almost chemical stench slammed into Eli's face. He gagged and slammed the door shut. The radiator began to hiss louder, its pipes knocking violently inside the walls. Thud, 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 like fists hammering to be let out. That night, Eli didn't sleep. He stayed curled on the bed, eyes fixed on the ceiling, flashlight clenched in hand. At 2:47 a.m., the bed shifted under him. No movement of the springs. No tilt. It simply moved. 6 inches to the left, dragging across the carpet with a sound like wet denim. He scrambled off it, flashlight beam trembling. The closet door was open again. He hadn't opened it. Inside, the rat was gone. In its place, a smear of something thick and brown streaked across the back wall, 4 fingers dragged downward. At the bottom, a set of scratch marks, as if something had tried to climb in, not out. His flashlight flickered. Then the floor groaned. Not from age, not from weight, but as if it was breathing. The entire room trembled subtly, like the bones of an old animal shifting in its sleep. A soft, dragging sound began again outside the door, this time slower, more deliberate. Eli ran to the door, peered through the peephole. Nothing. But when he turned back, the bed was gone, vanished. Just an empty square of flattened carpet and mold beneath the light. Then he saw it. Drag marks. 2 parallel lines in the carpet, beginning where the bed had been, leading directly into the wall. The plaster was cracked open, just slightly, as though the wall had eaten it. Eli stepped forward, heart hammering, reached out, his fingertips brushed the crack. A hand exploded out from the dry wall with a crunch of splintered lath and a wet slap. It gripped his wrist with fingers too long, nails black and jagged. The skin was waxy, bone-thin. Eli screamed, kicked, fell backward, tearing himself free as blood ran down his arm in slick rivulets. The hand withdrew just as quickly, vanishing into the wall. The crack sealed itself like a wound. Silence. Breathing hard, Eli backed against the opposite wall, clutching his wrist. And then, from the other side of the drywall, a whisper, soft. "Cure, you're still in 209. Eli didn't move, didn't breathe. A single tear carved a track through the dust on his cheek. The radiator hissed again. It almost sounded like laughter. Chapter 3. The Other Guest. Eli didn't open the door the next morning, not until sunlight had clearly soaked through the warped curtains and the radiator's hissing had quieted to a sullen breath. He sat on the edge of the carpet where the bed had once been, wrist bandaged with a strip of pillowcase soaked in antiseptic from his travel kit. The puncture wounds burned beneath the cloth, but the pain was distant. He hadn't slept, hadn't eaten. His body trembled in waves, like it was trying to evacuate itself from the inside out. He finally opened the door around noon. The hallway had changed again. It was shorter. Where the fire extinguisher had been, there was now a blank stretch of wall. A window that had overlooked the alley was gone entirely, replaced by a blotchy painting of a lake, one where all the trees in the background leaned the same direction, unnaturally bent by some unseen force. Eli stepped out. The carpet squished under his bare feet, damp with something he didn't want to name. He turned toward the stairwell, past room 215, a door he swore hadn't existed the day before. It looked untouched, pristine. The brass number gleamed like it had been polished that morning. Then the door creaked open. Inside, a single eye peeked out from the darkness, cloudy, pale, and human. Eli stopped. "Hello?" The door opened further, revealing an old woman in a faded blue nightgown. Her skin hung in folds like melted wax. She leaned heavily on a twisted wooden cane, the end wrapped in black duct tape. Her hair was thin and gray, hanging in limp clumps like wet yarn. She sniffed once, then nodded slightly. "It moved again, didn't it?" Eli blinked. "What?" "Your room," she said. "It's walking." She opened the door wider, gestured for him to enter. Desperation beat down caution. Inside, her room was dim and strangely warm. Candles burned in jars along the floorboards, their flames tiny and oddly still. A half-dozen clocks lined the walls, all showing different times. In the corner, an old suitcase sat beneath a crucifix carved entirely from matchsticks. She closed the door behind him, locking it with 3 separate latches. "They don't come in here," she said. "Not when the clocks are out of sync." Eli stood in the center of the room, arms limp at his sides. "What the hell is happening?" The woman gave him a long look. "You're the first since March. Room 209 doesn't like being left empty for too long. It gets lonely." Eli sat slowly in the creaking chair she pointed to. "So it's true. The room moves. Crawls," she corrected. "Each night, a few inches. Every storm season it gets worse. It's hungry now. Feeling. Amy?" She chuckled dryly. "Why any of us? Because you booked? Because you walked through the door? Because the thing in the foundation said you could?" She shuffled to the dresser and pulled open a drawer. From it she removed a stack of old yellowing blueprints. Brackenmoor was built over a sinkhole, or so they claimed. But before the hotel there was a church. Before that, a sanatorium. Before that, a coal pit. They kept digging down. Something found them. Eli looked at the plans. Room 209 had been originally built on the far east wing, but each set of blueprints showed it in a slightly different place. He counted. 17 changes in total. Over 70 years? "Hey, didn't anyone stop it?" he asked, mouth dry. "They tried," she whispered. "It took them, one by one. Staff stopped asking questions. The owners left it to rot. The rest of us just Watch it crawl. A sudden knock shattered the stillness. Sharp, measured, from the hallway. 3 solo-pounds. They turned. The woman blew out the candles one by one, whispering under her breath. Eli crouched instinctively. Then came a soft shkecht, a sound like claws dragging across the door. Then silence. Eli dared to breathe again, but the woman was staring at the floor, her eyes wide, her mouth slightly open. "What?" Eli asked. She pointed with a trembling finger. From under the door a thin tendril of black ichor oozed inward. It moved against gravity, slick and shimmering, snaking across the carpet toward them like a hunting leech. It split into 2, then 4. Eli stood, backing up, but his heel struck something hard. The suitcase. The crucifix on the wall pulsed, just once, and cracked down the middle. The clocks all stopped. Every one. The woman began to scream. The floor beneath the suitcase groaned, then buckled inward with a wet, ripping tang. From beneath, a mass of glistening, raw tissue burst forth, like a handless arm made of muscle and cartilage. It writhed into the room, dragging cords of black sinew behind it, the air filled with the stench of open wounds. Eli grabbed the woman by the arm, but she wouldn't move. She just kept screaming, high and shrill and broken. The tendrils latched onto her leg. Bit in. Blood sprayed, arterial, a hot red arc that struck the wall in a violent splash. The woman shrieked louder, then was yanked downward so fast her hips shattered with a crack that made Eli's stomach twist. Bone jutted from her nightgown. She was halfway into the hole before Eli even got a grip on her wrist. Her eyes locked on his. "Don't go to the basement," she choked, spitting blood between her teeth. "Don't let it finish." Then her arm gave way with a sickening pop. The ligaments tore. Her body disappeared into the floor with a wet crunch. Silence returned. Eli stood alone, soaked in blood, the floor sealing itself with a final squelching sigh. The suitcase was gone, so was the crucifix. All that remained was a smear of tissue on the floor, twitching like a severed nerve. From outside the room, a soft mechanical click. Eli opened the door slowly, trembling. The hallway was longer now. Room 209 was 30 feet farther down than it had been that morning. It was waiting. Chapter 4. Downward Spiral. Ellie could no longer tell how many days had passed. There were no clocks now. Only the measured rhythm of dripping water, the hiss of the radiator-like breath behind the walls, and the ceaseless, inching migration of room 209. It had moved again. Not just farther down the hall this time, down a floor. When Eli stepped into the hallway that morning, the door had vanished from its former position. In its place was blank wallpaper, bubbling with black mold and stitched down with a seam of dark wire. But the drag marks, the unmistakable gouges torn into the carpet, descended the staircase in long, blackened arcs. They led downward as though the room had grown impatient, dragging itself faster now, like a predator closing in on prey. He followed. The staircase was wrong. It shouldn't have gone as far as it did. 3 stories became 5, then 6. The wallpaper changed with each descent. First a worn gold damask, then faded seafoam green, then blotchy patchwork reds that seemed to bleed from the corners. With every step, the air grew heavier, thicker, as if the building was compressing around it. Patient. And the doors, they were no longer numbered sequentially. He passed room 104, then room 419, then a door labeled simply, some had no numbers at all, only carvings in the wood like claw marks or teeth. Eli reached what he thought was the lowest floor and found room 209. Its door was open. Inside, the room had transformed. Gone was the sagging bed and peeling wallpaper. Now it was deep cavernous, impossible in dimension. The ceiling was far above him, shrouded in shadow, while the far wall receded endlessly, crawling with shapes that slithered between warped sconces. And directly in the center, set into the floor, was an elevator shaft. Its door torn open, the metal bent outward like something had forced its way through from beneath. A breeze rose from the black pit, thick with decay, and a smell like scorched meat and wet stone. Eli shined his flashlight into the shaft. No cables, no mechanisms, just walls, covered in peeling, throbbing flesh that pulsed like lungs with every exhale of rot. A voice echoed up from the darkness, his voice shouting his name in a tone of strangled terror. Then silence. He backed away. The door slammed shut behind him with a thundering clang. Eli spun, grabbing the handle, but it was gone. Not locked. Gone. The wall was smooth, seamless, as if the room had swallowed the way out. Then came the scratching. Soft at first, like fingernails on drywall, then louder, then closer. From the far end of the room, something moved. It slithered along the ceiling, hunched and crab-like, covered in blistered skin stretched over an impossible number of limbs. Its mouth was a rectangle of cracking teeth, split vertically like a book bound in bone. From the gaps in its skin, hotel room keys jutted like splinters. It didn't walk toward Eli. It folded toward him, collapsing and reforming its body with every step, dragging its organs like a wedding train soaked in blood. Turned and ran toward the shaft. It was the only way. He climbed over the jagged lip, fingers tearing against rusted metal and living tissue. The shaft welcomed him, warm and wet, the walls clenching slightly as he descended. He used old pipe brackets to lower himself deeper, but the further down he went, the more the world began to change. The walls began to twitch. Faces pressed out from beneath translucent layers of meat, some weeping, others smiling without eyes. A rib cage jutted from one side of the shaft like a balcony, charred and filled with wriggling moths. The temperature fluctuated wildly, freezing one second, boiling the next. He slept. His fingers scraped against bone. His wrist caught on an exposed nail and tore open with a zip of skin. He screamed, but didn't fall. Something caught him. Not a platform, not a ledge. A hand. Long, colorless, fingers covered in writhing hair. It gripped him, gently at first, almost curious, then began to squeeze. Eli thrashed, elbowing and kicking until he was released, falling 5 feet into a pile of soft, damp fabric. Sheets. Hotel sheets, soaked through with blood and some darker fluid that smelled of ammonia and rot. He was at the bottom. The shaft ended in a long corridor. It was impossibly narrow, built from scraps of rooms fused together. Carpet, tile, wood, and human skin formed a patchwork floor. Mirrors lined the walls at odd intervals, each one reflecting distorted versions of Eli, some gaunt and hollow-eyed, others wide-mouthed and screaming silently. He passed a hallway labeled laundry, where blood ran beneath the door in a steady trickle. A room-marked boiler emitted a sound like someone choking on teeth. He kept walking. The whispers began again. Not from outside, from inside. Beneath his scalp, behind his eyes, a chorus of muttering voices. "Don't stop now. Almost home. Just a few more steps to check in." Bed. The corridor opened into a cavernous space. He stepped through and stopped. This was the foundation. A sunken ballroom, impossibly large, lit by a pulsating red glow from veins that crisscrossed the ceiling like roots. Hundreds of chairs were bolted to the floor, each one facing a central altar made from bed frames, wires, and what looked like human vertebrae. Atop the altar sat a throne, and in that throne was the room. Not the structure, not the space, the thing. It was constructed from pieces of the hotel. Its limbs were coiled extension cords, its torso a mattress wrapped in bloodied sheets. Its head was a bellhop's desk phone, receiver coiled into its mouth. Keys clung to its chest like barnacles, and in its lap a book. The ledger. He turned the pages with fingers made from hundreds of fanned-out guest cards. Then it looked up at Eli. It didn't move, didn't speak. It opened. Its torso split down the center, revealing a vertical maw filled with rotating bed springs and strips of snapping wet leather. From the pit of that body came the screams of every soul it had devoured, echoing, choking, layered over each other like a demonic choir. Eli turned to flee. The walls shifted instantly, doors appearing, closing, disappearing again. He was trapped. Chains erupted from the floor, coiling around his wrists, his ankles, his throat. One wrapped across his mouth, forcing it open. Another drove a hotel pen into his left eye. Nope. He screamed into the void, blood flooding his mouth. The ledger closed. The thing stood, its keys jangling like laughter. It opened Eli's chest with a corkscrewed jab from one of its clawed arms, dug in deep, and began to pull out pages, wet, warm, scrawled with letters that rearranged themselves into rooms it hadn't built yet. With a final groan, the chains lifted Eli high into the air and dropped him into the altar. The mattress coils enveloped him, and the room sank back into its throne. Silent, satisfied. Far above, in the front lobby, the brass plaque on a newly polished door gleamed faintly. Room B13. It waited. Chapter 5. The Foundation. Room 209 was no longer on the second floor. Eli stood in the hallway, breath fogging in the sudden drop of temperature. The numbers on the doors were no longer in sequence. 207, 301, 1F, 209. The brass plaques had begun to tarnish, each one smeared with black fingerprints, some too large to be human. The walls were buckling inward as though the building was being squeezed by something outside, something immense and slowly tightening its grip. The carpet squelched beneath Eli's feet as he stepped toward the end of the hallway. A low groan echoed from within the walls, the sound of bending rebar and snapping plaster like bones being broken in deep water. He stopped at the threshold of room 209. The number had been etched directly into the wood now, gouged with something sharp and deliberate. A fresh gash split the door down the center, leaking a slow ooze of black resin that pulsed faintly with heat. The doorknob was missing. In its place, a hole, dark and organic, like a gaping eye socket. The wood around it was wet, flexing gently, as if it breathed. Eli pressed his bleeding palm against it. The door opened. Inside, the room had changed again. The bed was gone. So was the radiator. The ceiling bulged inward like a heavy stomach, wet with condensation that dripped in slow, steady beats onto the floor. The window had sealed itself over with yellow-gray flesh, veined and twitching. The walls pulsed with a low heartbeat. On the far side, the closet was wide open, and inside, the elevator shaft. But it wasn't an elevator anymore. What stood in its place was a mouth, a vertical wound in reality, stitched loosely with chains and strips of wire, stretching from floor to ceiling. It dripped bile and light. Around its edges, fragments of runes clung like scabs, bedposts, rugs, chunks of painted wall, a crucifix half melted into a switchplate. Inside, a darkness so dense it seemed to drink sound. The mouth was breathing. It inhaled with a deep, wet pull that drew the curtains inward. Its breath reeked of iron and meat left in the sun. Eli stepped forward. The floor tilted beneath him. Not gravity, intention. The room was sliding again, dragging itself closer to the mouth. He turned to run. The door slammed shut behind him with a deafening bang, nearly taking his fingers off. The wall erupted in a violent ripple, throwing him forward into the bedless center of the room. The air vibrated. The walls groaned louder. Then, from the ceiling, something dropped. The figure. Human once. It hung upside down, suspended by flesh-colored cords threaded through its joints. Its body twitched in ragged spasms. The face was skinless, teeth exposed in a permanent rictus. Its eye sockets were filled with dust and wire. It opened its mouth and croaked. "You brought it all the way down?" The cords yanked it back into the ceiling with a wet snap. Eli screamed, backing toward the closet, toward the mouth. The walls were melting now, their paper sloughing off in long strips, revealing muscle underneath. Veins pulsed. The room was digesting itself. And behind him the mouth opened wider. From its depths came the sound of whispering voices, thousands, overlapping, speaking languages not meant for the living. Some cried, some laughed. Others repeated a name he didn't recognize until it began to sound like his own. He turned and stepped into the mouth. The world inverted. For a second he saw every room that had ever been 209. Dozens of them, all fused into one impossible corridor. Some were upside down. Some were rotting. Some were filled with water. Others were packed wall to wall with motionless figures, stitched together in chains of flesh. The walls here were made of people, torso to torso, limb to limb, faces frozen in expressions of eternal, silent screams. They were the ones who hadn't left, who had stayed, who had followed the room all the way down. The hallway narrowed, pulling him deeper. Each step felt like it cost him a part of himself. His skin itched, then burned. He looked down to see his arms curling in ink-back veins, his fingernails curling backward like dried leaves. His shadow warped behind him, growing longer, then shorter, then sprouting more arms. Finally, he reached the foundation. It wasn't concrete. It wasn't earth. It was living. A cathedral of flesh and steel, stitched together with bed frames, window panes, bathroom mirrors, rotting chairs fused to cartilage, shards of bone nailed into brick. The ceiling sagged with the weight of hundreds of upside-down corpses dangling like meat in a butcher's freezer. In the center, a pulsing throne of mattress coils and blood-soaked linens. On it sat a figure made of runes. Its face was a cracked sink basin. Its ribs were window blinds. Its hands were dozens of keys, shaking, jingling, twitching. Where its legs should have been were piles of folded towels drenched in something black and steaming. It opened its mouth. No tongue. Only a hotel ledger. The pages turned themselves. Eli's name was the last entry. The creature rose. Eli ran, but the floor rose with him, curled upward like a wave of flesh and wood. He tripped, fell, landed hard on a tiled surface that squirmed beneath him. When he looked up, the creature loomed over him. It sank toward him, its key-ring fingers reaching. They jabbed into his chest. One key into his heart, other into his throat, one behind his eye. Each key twisted with a shriek of metal. Eli didn't scream. His voice had already been taken. He convulsed as the keys turned, unlocking something inside him. From his mouth, light poured out. Then blood and teeth, not his own. The creature leaned close, whispered in a voice that sounded like every guest who had ever died in the hotel. "Welcome to the Foundation." Then it lowered its face, and ate him. The next morning, the receptionist stood behind the desk, expression blank. The front door opened. A young couple walked in, tired from travel. "Reservation for two?" the man asked. She handed them a key. Brass, newly polished. "Room B13. Enjoy your stay," she said, as the walls breathed behind her.